99% misunderstand what the Buddha really meant by mindfulness. When the Buddha lists the factors for awakening, he says that there are some that are appropriate when the mind is sluggish. Those factors are analysis of qualities, rapture, and persistence, the qualities that energize the mind. Then there are qualities appropriate when the mind is overly excited, overly energetic, calm, equanimity, and concentration. Those calm the mind down. You need both sets of qualities in the practice. It's simply a matter of finding balance and of having a sense of time and place. There's one quality, though, that's appropriate everywhere, all the time. That's mindfulness. So it's especially important, as we practice, that we understand what mindfulness is. Sometimes you hear that mindfulness is simply an open, accepting awareness of things, just noting what's happening and allowing it to happen without interfering. But that's actually equanimity. The Buddha himself defines mindfulness as the ability to remember for a long time what's been done and said. It's the ability to keep things in mind. And what do you keep in mind? To begin with, you keep in mind the need to develop the skillful factors of the path and to abandon the unskillful ones. This applies to all the factors. Once you know what's right view, what's wrong view, right resolve, wrong resolve, all the way down to right concentration and wrong concentration, you keep in mind your intention to develop the right side and to abandon the wrong. The Buddha compares mindfulness to a gatekeeper for a frontier fortress. In a frontier fortress, you have to be very wary because there are spies and other people from the outlying countries. They want to sneak in and do damage to your fortress. So you have to be very careful who comes in and who doesn't. And mindfulness, the Buddha says, is like a wise gatekeeper who recognizes who should be let in and who should not be let in, and he lets in only those who should be let in. So you have to keep this distinction in mind. Which qualities in the mind are skillful and which ones are not? Which ones should be developed and which ones abandoned? There's another passage where the Buddha says that mindfulness is like a goad. Most of us have gotten away from animal husbandry and farming, and so we don't even know what a goad is. It's a long stick with a sharp point. You use it to poke your animals when they're going the wrong direction, or if they're standing still when they should be going. The implication here is that the ability to remember what's skillful and what's not, and to be able to give yourself a little push or a poke in the right direction. That's what mindfulness does for you. And sometimes it's more than just a little poke. There's another passage where the Buddha says that when you see that something unskillful has arisen in your mind, then you act as if your hair were on fire. You do everything you can, as quickly as you can, to put it out. You're relentless and mindful in being focused on putting out the fire, and nothing else. So all of these passages show that mindfulness is not just a broad, open, accepting state of mind. It serves a particular purpose, and it can be narrowly focused. Keeping in mind what you know about what's skillful and what's not, and reminding yourself that you really do want to focus on pursuing the skillful path and avoiding the unskillful one at all costs. This is why mindfulness and discernment usually go together. In fact, in Thai, they have a term, sati panya, mindfulness discernment, which is their word for intelligence. It's the intelligence of a really practical person, one who knows the distinction between what's skillful and what's not, and is wise enough to know that you have to keep that in mind so that you can act on it all the time. In the Buddha's portrayal of how all the different factors of the path work together, right mindfulness, right view, which is the discernment factor, and right effort all go together, you have right view about what's right and what's wrong, what's skillful and what's not. You keep that in mind. You keep in mind your desire to do the right thing, and you motivate yourself to act on that desire. That's right mindfulness. As the Pali phrase describing right effort says, you generate the desire to prevent unskillful qualities that haven't arisen from arising, and abandon them if they have arisen. At the same time, you generate the desire to give rise to skillful qualities, and then, once they're there, you encourage them, develop them. So you're not just sitting here watching things coming and going, arising and passing away and saying, well, that's that. You realize that your mind is the factor that shapes your life and that its decisions will have a huge impact. You keep that in mind. And when the mind begins to wander off, you use the goad of mindfulness to bring it right back. Sometimes all you have to do is simply remind it and it'll come back. Other times, it's a bit more resistant. That's when you give it a sharp poke. This is where you can use other meditation techniques as well. But mindfulness helps there too. It has to keep in mind all the various techniques that you've heard about and that you've actually put into practice and found that they work. You've got to keep all that in mind because we do have this tendency to forget. Sometimes the forgetting is just a simple dropping of what we were trying to remember, and other times it's willful forgetfulness, when part of the mind has decided it's not interested in the path at all. It wants to go off and get a little pleasure on the side, fantasizing about this beautiful person, that lovely sound, those nice flavors, whatever you're fantasizing about. When you're in that state of mind, you willfully forget the fact that you're sitting here meditating or that you're trying to follow a path of practice. That's when mindfulness has to be especially sharp in reminding you. So try to be very clear about what mindfulness does. We're not here just to watch things arise and pass away, trying to be equanimous. There are times when equanimity is going to be needed, but not the type of equanimity that simply lets things take over, regardless of whether they're good or bad. There are times when equanimity is skillful, and times when it's not. You want to keep in mind the Buddha's teachings. You want to keep in mind the Buddha's example. You want to keep in mind whatever other teachings you've heard that are skillful, along with your own discoveries concerning your own mind about what's skillful and what's not, and what works and what doesn't work. This is why mindfulness is useful at all times, everywhere, regardless of whether the mind is sluggish or over-energized. You can't let yourself forget these things. Otherwise, it's like having a water buffalo when you have no goad, no control over the buffalo at all. If you're trying to plow the field, the buffalo will just go anywhere it wants, and then stop whenever it wants. The field never gets plowed and you never get done with your work. So remember that little voice inside that remembers to be heedful, that remembers to be on top of things, and remembers the importance of your actions. Your actions really do shape your life. They really do shape your meditation. The decisions you're making from moment to moment to moment are important. Keep that point in mind, and you'll find that it really helps you keep on track and keeps you at work. And if the work seems tiresome, remember that it's not all just work. You can have elements of calm, concentration, and rapture, all the good parts of the path as well as the carrot to nourish you. But the mindfulness is the stick. You need both the carrot and the stick in order to get your field plowed so that it will provide the food you need for your true well-being. Right mindfulness. The term mindfulness on its own is something neutral. It can be put to good uses or bad because it simply means keeping something in mind. You can keep in mind the fact that you want to put an end to suffering, or you can keep in mind a decision to rob a bank. In either case, it's mindfulness. Mindfulness becomes right or wrong depending on the task to which you put it. Whether from the point of view of putting an end to suffering, you're keeping the right or the wrong things in mind. So as we're practicing, we want to make sure our mindfulness is right mindfulness. There are two spots in the canon where the Buddha defines right mindfulness. The best known definition is in terms of the 4 satipathanas, the 4 establishings of mindfulness. In fact, there are 2 huge discourses on the topic, but it's also good to keep in mind that there's another definition of right mindfulness that's a lot simpler. It's simply keeping in mind the fact that you want to develop the skillful qualities of the path and to abandon their antitheses. In other words, you keep in mind the fact that you want to develop right view and abandon wrong view, to develop right resolve and abandon wrong resolve, and so on down the line. What this means is that you're not just observing without preference whatever comes up. You're keeping in mind the fact that there are skillful qualities you want to develop and unskillful ones you want to abandon. When you keep that fact in mind and then apply it to what you're doing, that's right mindfulness combined with right effort. And it's important to keep this context in mind. Sometimes people interpret the teachings on the establishings of mindfulness out of context, saying that right effort and right concentration are one sort of practice, whereas right mindfulness is something else entirely. But right mindfulness actually leads to right concentration, and it builds on right effort. The the desire and effort to develop skillful qualities of the mind and to abandon unskillful ones. You have to keep that in mind. To keep that in mind effectively, you've got to establish mindfulness to give yourself a framework that will lead to right concentration. So as we're practicing mindfulness, remember the context. We try to develop a skillful understanding of what's skillful in the mind and what's not, along with the desire to develop what's skillful, to abandon what's not. And now we're going to keep that in mind. The best way to remember something is to have a good solid framework or foundation, a good frame of reference, which is where the establishings of mindfulness come in. Sometimes you see these establishings listed simply as body, feelings, mind, and mental qualities. Those, when taken in and of themselves, are the frames of reference you use when establishing mindfulness. But the actual establishing of mindfulness is much more. It's a complex process. To begin with the first frame of reference, you try to remain focused on the body in and of itself, ardent, alert, and mindful, putting aside greed and distress with reference to the world. That whole process is the first establishing of mindfulness, and it's the process we're working on here as we focus on the breath. It's a process centered on the body, and it's good to understand each aspect of the process. To remain focused is termed anupassana. You choose something to watch, and then you stick with it, in this case, the body in and of itself. In other words, you're not looking at the body as part of the world, or however it might be measured in the context of the world, whether it's good-looking or bad-looking, whether it's strong enough to do the jobs you need to do out in the world. You're simply with the body in and of itself on its own terms, ardent, alert, and mindful. Ardency is what carries the process of right effort into the practice of right mindfulness. You really want to do this skillfully, for you acutely know what can happen if you don't develop these skills. Alert means that you're watching what you're doing, paying close attention to what you're doing and to the results you're getting. And of course, you're mindful, remembering to stay focused on the body, putting aside greed and distress with reference to the world. This means that anytime you want to switch your frame of reference back to the world, you try to remind yourself, no, you don't want anything out of the world for the time being. You're not going to let the issues of the world get you worked up. You're going to stay right here with your original frame of reference, i.e., the body in and of itself, and then try to carry that frame of reference into all of your activities. Instead of jumping to other frames of reference, you stay with this one, with the sense of the body. As you're sitting here watching the breath, then when you get up, when you walk around, try to keep the body in mind all the time, and be alert to how the breath energy feels within and around the body. As for anything else that may come up, whether it's a thought, a feeling, or an interaction with someone else, try to see how it affects the body, how it affects the breath. This is how you strengthen your frame of reference and turn it into an object of concentration. When you're talking with someone else, notice how your body is reacting during the talking. When you're working, notice how your body is reacting, how the breath is reacting during the work. Always refer things back to the breath. That way, your frame of reference becomes really established, and you start getting insights you wouldn't have seen otherwise. That's because establishing the body here as your frame of reference helps to keep the mind inside instead of flowing out. Luang Pu Dun once said that the mind flowing out to its objects is suffering. So to unlearn that habit of flowing out and causing suffering, you want to keep your awareness centered inside. Of course, what will happen is that your awareness will keep flowing out anyhow, but maybe after a time you'll be able to see it flow out as you're not flowing along with it. It's as if one mental state is flowing out while the observer is staying right here with the body. When you don't go out with that mental state, it stops. It goes out a little ways and just falters and dies. That's an important insight, the realization that you can observe states of mind without getting entangled with them. That's when you can start using other frames of reference. Ajahn Lee makes the point that when you're staying with the breath, you've got all 4 frames of reference right there. You've got the breath, which is an aspect of the body. Then there's the feeling associated with the breath. There's the mind state that's trying to be alert and maintain concentration. And then there are the various mental qualities, either the hindrances that are interfering with your concentration or the factors for awakening that are helping you along. You want to make use of all 4 frames, but the body is basic. Staying with the body helps you observe the mind, feelings, and mental qualities without getting sucked in by them. This is why the meditation begins with the breath. This is why, when Buddha gave instructions on how to develop concentration in a way that brings to fruition all four establishings of mindfulness, he said to stay with the breath. As you stay with the breath, you focus on the breath in ways that deal with feelings, that deal with the mind, that deal with mental qualities, but you never really leave the breath. Instead, you train yourself to observe things in conjunction with the breath. So of all the various places you can establish mindfulness, the breath is the most important, the most crucial, the one that you really want to work on the most. There's a passage in the texts where the Buddha says you can focus on the body internally or externally, or both internally and externally. This fits into a pattern we often see in the teachings, that when you look at yourself, you also want to remind yourself that whatever is true about the inner workings of your body and mind is true about everybody else's body and mind. This helps put things into perspective. When you're having trouble with your hindrances, remind yourself that you're not the only one. Other people have trouble with the hindrances as well. When you have pain in the body, remind yourself that everybody else has pains in the body too. This follows the pattern on the night of the Buddha's awakening. He started with knowledge about his own past, his own stories. And if you think you're carrying around a lot of stories, think about someone who could remember back many eons, all the stories he could have carried around. But he didn't carry them around. He just watched them. He observed them and came up with some questions. Does this truth, the truth of rebirth, apply only to me or to other people? What's the principle that determines how you go from one life to the next? So, in the second watch of the night, he inclined his mind to the passing away and rebirth of all beings, seeing people dying and being reborn on all the many levels of the cosmos. In seeing the larger picture in this way, he saw a larger pattern, that the nature of your actions is what determines where you get reborn. Skillful actions done under the influence of right views lead to a good rebirth. Unskillful ones done under the influence of wrong views lead to a bad rebirth. That's the general principle. Notice that the Buddha started out with himself, then moved to other beings, before finally arriving at the third insight, which was to focus directly on the present moment in and of itself. Looking at the larger picture before focusing on the present may seem like a detour, but it's actually needed to put things into perspective. Otherwise, as you're sitting here meditating and facing your problems, it seems like you're the only one sitting here in pain or distraction. It's helpful to remind yourself that everybody goes through this. No matter how bad the pain, there have been people who sat through worse pain and yet came out on the other side. No matter how obsessive the distraction, there have been people who disentangled themselves from even worse distractions. So these contemplations of your body and other people's bodies, your mind and other people's minds, seem to be designed to put things into perspective as an aid in putting aside greed and distress with reference to the world. All of this is designed to put the mind in a position where it's ready to settle down. The mindfulness and alertness protect the mind and provide a good foundation. The quality of ardency is what helps make it skillful. And when you reflect on the universality of suffering, it gives you the right motivation for practicing. All these qualities together get you ready to settle down and stay really solidly with the breath. That's what right mindfulness is all about. It's not simply a matter of observing what arises and passes away and just letting it arise and pass away. Mindfulness is not so much about allowing as it is about directing the mind in a skillful direction toward right concentration. So when you're observing things arising and passing away, whether in body or the mind, it's not just a matter of being a passive observer. There's a purpose to your attention, so it's not bare. You want to observe these things so that you understand them. You want to understand them so you can gain some mastery over them, so that you can direct the states of mind and the issues that arise in the body in the direction of right concentration. For instance, if there are pains in the body, what can you do? How can you relate to the pains so that they don't knock the concentration off course? How do you breathe in a way that helps spread pleasure around in the body? What attitudes can you develop toward what's going on in the body and the mind to help get you over difficult patches? These are the things you want to keep in mind. So right mindfulness is not just a matter of having the right place to focus your attention. It's also a matter of bringing the right attitude, remembering the right attitude, the attitude that comes from right effort, the desire to do things skillfully and to let go of unskillful habits. When you have that attitude in charge, your mindfulness becomes right mindfulness, the kind of mindfulness that brings all the factors of the path together.